Okay, so welcome back, and thanks to those who have joined up and are new members. I'm going to just jump right in. We're starting this off by laying out the holes that I'm going to drill. They are 1 5/8 diameter. There's 8 on each row, 16 total, and I've spread them out about 2 inches apart. Now, I originally wanted to drill these by hand. I wanted to do this whole project by hand, with exception to milling the lumber. But I didn't have the right size bit for my brace, so I couldn't drill these by hand. I had to use the drill press. So since I'm using the drill press, I'm using a Forstner bit to drill these holes, and I'll set my depth to where just the point of that bit goes through the workpiece. It's about 3/8 inch thick workpiece. And then I'll flip it over and come back and find that little hole and finish it off. If you drill all the way through, obviously you're going to blow out the other side and it's going to look really bad. So you just want to drill enough to get that point through, and then you flip your workpiece over and finish your hole off. Okay, so with the holes drilled, I jump right into cutting dovetails. So I'll cut these using my Moxon vise. I find it a lot easier to cut dovetails on the Moxon vise as opposed to my bench vise. It just secures the workpiece a lot better, and it's actually a lot faster. So you can see I've just got two handles to tighten down, basically 2 boards, just pinch it together. There's leather on the inside. So when you start here, obviously you can see I'm using my thumb to start my cut. It's always a really slow, gradual cut until you establish your curve, and then it's just a matter of going and staying on your line. Well, if you do this enough, it'll become natural, the tilt of the saw, the angle. I work with a 1:7 ratio on my angles, so it's become natural to me. It's pretty easy for me to get a feel for it, but sometimes it's easier for people to start at 90, establish the curve, and then tilt your saw to the angle you want to cut. Obviously, you always want to make sure you don't cut all the way through to your baseline. So with the vertical cuts on my pins, I now cut the 2 outside shoulders. There's actually 4, 2 on each side. I start by making a knife wall. This is kind of a little edge that my saw can rest on, and I can get a finished cut right off the saw using this technique. And so a knife wall is just a square line marked all the way around your baseline using a knife. It's a fairly simple process, but it's important when you're using hand tools and hand saws to use that knife wall. Okay, so with those 4 cut, I just showed you one there, but with those 4 cut, I'm moving on to my coping saw. This will take the waste out of the middle of the 2 tails. It's a pretty simple cut. It's a very quick method. I'll come back with a chisel and finish off that last bit of waste. And that's another advantage to having that knife wall. You'll see here in a second when I start chiseling out that waste, is it gives me a reference point to go to with my chisel. This coping saw needs a new blade. It's a little bent. So I've got a 3/8 bench chisel here. I've got it sharp, and I'm working my way back to that knife wall. I don't put my chisel edge directly into the knife wall on the first cut because the bevel will actually push it back into your shoulder. I take a little bit off, so I just have a tiny little bit of waste there, and then I can take it all in one cut. So with everything cut, I obviously showed you one side of the tail, so now I'm going to move on to the pins. The process obviously is the same for the other side of the tails, so we'll move on to the pins, and I'm just laying out right now that shoulder line, the baseline. This is basically the thickness of the workpiece here. And this is a technique I haven't been using a lot, but I just started using, where I use blue tape to lay out. The most critical part of dovetails is the transfer of your tails to your pins. If you get that wrong, they're never going to fit well. So a lot of times, for the majority of my woodworking career, I've used a sharp pencil to make that transfer. This is a technique I learned from a book I read that Mike Pekovich wrote, and I'll put that link in the description. And it basically just put blue tape on the ends, and then you can lay your tails over that blue tape and use your knife and cut the tape out. So the tape remaining is your pin, and what you take off is your waist. And it really, really works well. My dovetails have improved significantly using this technique, especially fitting them right off the saw. Typically there was a lot of shaving and fitting for me, but with this technique they fit off the saw really well. Another thing I like about it is once you take that tape off, you know, the thickness of the tape, which is not a lot, but it's enough to almost create like a knife wall for your saw. So it gives you a point to rest those teeth on, almost right on where your line needs to be. It's really a pretty effective way of doing things. So I'll make the vertical cuts. The key here is to make a straight down cut or cut slightly angled off of your line. Obviously if you cut into your line, you're going to create gaps. If you cut a little bit off your line going away from it, you can chisel that out pretty easily. So once I get those 4 vertical cuts, I go back to my coping saw just like I did with the tails and take out the waist. So the trick with the coping saw, and you're going to see here in a second, I actually make a mistake here. And you can see the saw is tilted down at an angle. So I'm actually cutting past my line right now behind, and I realize it here.
Right.
And this is something I've done before. It's really easy to do with a coping saw to not be level. So you can almost see there where I went down, I corrected it. The good thing is it's on the back side of the pin, so it's on the inside of what I'm making, so you're not going to see it. That's why when I take the coping saw and cut out the waist, I always put the outside of my board facing me. I know I'm not going to cut through the line if I'm looking at it, and if I cut through on the back side, it's not great, but you're not going to really see it. Okay, so with the majority of the waist out, it's the same technique was used on the tails. We're going to just chisel it out. I'm going to slowly work back to that knife wall. I don't want to start right on the knife wall because it'll press that chisel back into my shoulder. So once I get that one side, I flip over and come back and meet in the middle. You never want to go all the way through because you'll blow out. So you can get almost all of it done with this technique, and then you can put it in the vise and get your chisel super sharp. You want to go back and resharpen and just shave what's left out. As I do this, you don't see it in the video, but I'm using a square and always checking how square and how level that flat is. If you have to make some adjustments, you just do it with the chisel. Mine came out here pretty good, but you always want to have a square on hand so you can check and see how your progress is coming. So I was lucky on this one. It actually fit really well right off the saw, which is really the best you can do with dovetails. And I really credit that to the blue tape technique. I think it's improved mine a lot, so I would recommend trying that. The other one on the other side, which you don't see in the video, actually fit a little tighter. I did some shaving to clean it up, but it wasn't too much work. Finally, we're going to glue it up. You don't have to use clamps with dovetails, but why not? I mean, it helps to pull it all together. I'll put glue on both the tails and the pins and hammer it home, and then clamp it down. And then it doesn't hurt either to clamp across the board. You can actually pull, if you have a gap, you can actually pull it together somewhat, so it helps you out. Now we come back. I let that glue go for about 2 hours, which is probably not quite long enough, but it was pretty hot and dry this day. The final step is going to be to flush everything up using a low angle jack plane. This is my favorite plane to use for this technique because it works really well on in grain, and it also works great on the long grain. So since you have both of those going here, it's a great plane to use for this. You could use a 4.5, just a smoothing plane or a bench plane, but I like, since I have it, I like to use this low angle, and I get it nice and sharp before I get going, so it works well. I'll start with the top pins and level those out with the top of the tray, and then flip it over and level out the tails with the sides. And I can go here across the grain because my plane is really sharp. It's not going to leave a polished surface, but it's also not going to tear out or do anything. I'll come back after I level it because it's easier to level out going that way. I'll come back after I level it and try to make a few passes going with the grain, just to clean it up a little bit. And then I got to get the sides leveled out. They were pretty good. It wasn't too much work. And the last step here is I just used a block plane to kind of ease all the edges. Real simple, easy, nothing fancy. And I didn't do any sanding. This is basically the end of it here. This is how far I took it. As far as finish goes, I put a spray. I've been spraying these tables in the background of the shop, so I just sprayed some of that. It's an Enduro Poly from General Finishes. I didn't show it in the video because it's not that exciting, but I put a couple coats of that on, and that kind of closed it down. And as always, I appreciate you guys being members, and stay tuned for the live stream coming this month, probably the last week of the month. So if you have any questions, you can ask me there, or you can shoot me a comment in the video. Appreciate it, guys.